Welcome and good evening. I'm your host, Syed Neaz Ahmad, and this is NTV Europe Talking Point is the name of this chat show. In our studios today we have a lady who is a campaigner, a writer, and a believer in the equality of gender. She is none other than Amrit Wilson, a writer and an activist, as I said, on issues of race and gender in UK and South Asia. She is a regular writer for The Guardian and founder member of South Asian Solidarity Group. She is the founder chairperson of IMCON, she was associated with Anne Obad. Her books include Finding a Voice, Dreams and Questions and Struggles Regarding Asian Women. We will talk about her books when I start talking to her, asking her questions about her life as a writer and a campaigner. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm very well, thanks.
I'm so thankful to you that finally we managed to meet. Last time we tried, it was the traffic congestion in London.
I know, London has been terrible.
What have you been doing lately?
Well, the last few weeks have been quite busy because South Asia Solidarity Group, which is the group I am very much involved with, most recently we supported the demo against Trump coming here, the state visit.
Right.
And so, you know, there was a certain amount of work associated with that. And
there was almost every evening.
Well, I mean, there were a lot of things, and we also organized a meeting about this moment in South Asia when we have Trump on the one hand and Modi on the other in India, and how this plays out in terms of politics of South Asia. So we organized a meeting with speakers from different parts of South Asia. Unfortunately, no Bangladeshi was speaker, but we had a speaker speaking about the Rohingyas. So
right, great. From Burma, or?
Yes, well, he was actually a very interesting man because he had been an activist in Burma and he had been in prison, been imprisoned by the military regime.
Right.
Then released, and he then started campaigning about the Rohingyas. And he was very interesting because he was saying that when Aung San Suu Kyi was in prison, he campaigned for her.
Right.
But when she came out, he was deeply disappointed with her approach. So he spoke about the Rohingyas, and then we had speakers. We had a speaker on Kashmir. Kavita Krishnan had come over from India.
Right.
And we had a Sri Lankan speaker and Pakistani speakers. So it was a very exciting meeting.
But most probably you have spent a lot of time defending the rights of women and gender equality, and you have written so much about that, and you have written about the Asian women, and your first book, Finding a Voice, that was the first book ever written and about Asian women, their problems.
In Britain.
In Britain, yes, of course, living here. What made you do that? I mean, your personal experience as a person who was working with the community?
Well, I think it was a combination of different factors. For a start, you know, the way I am passionately interested in politics, whether it's international politics or domestic politics. But the way I see politics is through a number of differentiations, you know, whether it's gender, whether it's caste in South Asia, whether it's race, and of course class.
Yes.
So these things come into my view of any situation. I was lucky enough that my parents certainly had the similar approach to what I have. My mother was one of the early feminists in India. And when I came here, I found that South Asian women in this country, and this was way back in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. And I found that, you know, they had a really hard time here because, you know, they were torn apart from sometimes from their families.
Yeah.
They had married and come here, so there were issues of great loneliness. Plus, there was, of course, racism, which
and also of
they
communication, isn't it? Because good
yes,
number
I
of them
mean,
did not.
certainly there were issues of communication, but I think what made it much harder was that there was intense racism,
Yes.
particularly. I remember I wrote a chapter about what it was like in East London. And in fact, that was the first chapter of my book that I wrote. You know, for ages I was thinking, how am I going to write this book, which is so complex and so important. But when I began to think about what life was like for Bangladeshi women in East London, I remember one day I just went home and I just wrote a whole chapter. And
the feeling was that intense.
yes, it was very, very intense because I had spent a long time also researching it. Like,
Right.
you know, I speak Bangla, but I knew that the community here spoke Sylheti. So I got a Sylheti friend, to teach me at least a little bit of Sylheti. And it made a huge difference, you know.
You interviewed ladies at home.
I interviewed, yes, at home. And, you know.
Were you well received, or there were some apprehensions?
No, I was actually extremely well received. I mean, I was much younger then, of course, but I was very, very well received. And I remember one woman whom I met, who was a young woman. She had got married and she'd had her first child, and she was suffering acute depression, you know. And so I talked to her, and she told me what it felt like. And then I also found out about the kind of help she was getting.
Yeah.
And those days, you know, they used to give you electric shocks. That was the psychiatric treatment. It was just incredibly horrible, you know. Yeah. So I wrote about all of those things. And so that's what, you know, that gave me the push to actually write it.
What was the reaction of the general public? I mean, how was your book received?
Well, it was interesting because, you know, when my book was published, very soon after that, sort of within that month, I decided to go back to India and see my parents, because they were obviously very happy that I'd written a book. I took some copies, and people there had already read it. Yeah. And I got very strikingly different opinions. In India, you know, people would say, oh God, we never knew that Britain was so racist, you know. Whereas people here, particularly English people, were saying, oh, you know, there's a lot of gender issues here. So it was, you know, what you see, what you want to see in the end, you know.
True. You've been talking about different feminism and gender issues and all that. But what is feminism? I mean, is it only because the equality of sexes that we are talking about when you say feminism, or is a person is a feminist, what does he believe?
I don't think it's about equality only. I think it's about the way society functions, you know, and how it affects men as well as women, how you're expected to be,
right, and
the relations of power within that society.
Yeah, well, sometimes the problem is within the four walls of the house itself, isn't it?
Yes,
when you say
it's
about
reflected
equality of genders. And
well, of course, I mean, you know, how you bring up your son is very different from how you bring up your daughter.
True.
So there are equality issues there, definitely, absolutely.
I have read somewhere that you feel, or probably others feel, that the feminists should join other minority groups, because this is an issue that is not just of gender as such, but it's an issue that is everywhere, and it's regarded as a minor issue of minorities. And so if we join other minorities, it will be more useful and powerful.
Well, you know, I remember when I first got involved with feminism in Britain, um, there were certain issues which came out very powerfully, like, you know, the mainly white feminists. They felt that the issue of race should not be brought up. And we argued that we cannot separate race and gender for us, you know. Whether you are a woman or you are an Asian or you're an African, these things are completely linked up, you know. And so this was the beginning of people actually understanding that you can't separate gender from all the other identities that we may have, you know. That we are people, that all human beings have multiple identities.
True, true. I remember a long time ago when I was a young journalist, I was in a press conference. I don't remember whether it was the Race Relations Board or whether it was Equal Opportunities, the gentleman who was the head. And we asked him a question, describe to us who can be the most disadvantaged person with regard to a job? And he said, a black woman. And that exactly reflects what you have just said, you see, race and gender.
This is true. I mean, this is true. But then again, things, you know, things shift as well. And I think now for black men, perhaps it's harder, you know, in our present society. Or for Muslims, now if you look at, you know.
Yes, that is another issue that we will touch upon.
Okay.
You were saying that, just before we started, that your first book, this is about finding a voice, you see. You have found the opportunities are coming up that it will get a secondary
Yes, there is
edition.
a possibility that, you know, a publisher has actually asked me if I want to have it reprinted.
Right.
And what I really like to do is have a preface where women who read that book when they were young actually tell me what they thought of it, and to use that as a kind of introduction. So, I mean, that is sort of a possibility that it will happen again.
Great.
You know.
That book was published sometime in 80s?
No, it was first published in 78, actually.
78, near to
Long
80.
time,
But what is your experience? I mean, you have been here. How far have the women really found their voice? They can be heard. Has it made any difference? Not just your campaign, but other people who are with you, your different organizations.
I think,
Have
you
you
know,
made a
there's been
dent?
a huge difference because there's a new generation grown up here.
Yep.
If you look around you, you know, you find Asian women, Bangladeshi women doing all kinds of things,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
in positions of power, they're MPs,
Yeah.
you know, so yes, there's a massive change.
Even
you
your
know.
MP is a Bangladeshi.
Yes, Tulip
Lady.
Siddiqui is certainly a Bangladeshi woman. But I think while that's true, there are still issues of extreme oppression and violence, which you know are still there in the community, which do need to be challenged. You know.
Unfortunately, we need to take a break here, and then when we come back, we'll continue the discussion.
Okay.
We had to take this break. Don't go away. We'll be back soon.